Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Martha and Sheila, for organizing this. As Martha alluded to, we had a little excitement this morning. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to some beeping sounds in our house and no power, and went back to sleep because I figured it'll sort itself out. So we've spent the last bit. I was actually moments from getting in my car to go park outside of Martha's house and piggyback on her internet when our power suddenly came back on. So, you know, good things happen. But again, good morning, and thanks for everybody for joining. I hope everyone is doing okay. I know these are challenging times, and I can tell people must be pretty desperate for some distraction because hearing me natter on about myself is really not a particularly unusual occurrence. Or perhaps we're just getting really good at social distancing, and it's only my family that's stuck with me while we all shelter in place. And they're, I can guarantee you, getting a bit tired of it. So thank you for taking the load off them for a little bit. But there is a reason I tend to talk so much, and it's because I'm a believer in the power of story. Our lives are stories woven of acts and thoughts, deeds and connections. Some stories are told in the fleeting brush of an instant, and some over the course of decades. Some stories we tell to ourselves in the quiet corners of our souls. Some we tell to loved ones in the quiet corners of intertwined lives. And some stories ring out in public squares, laid bare for the world to see. And of course, these public stories are the ones we want most to control, to write mindfully and to our best advantage. Or putting all of that another way, why use 5 words when you can use 20? So here's the story that I want to tell. Like so many people, I find challenging the process of defining and talking about what I give my heart to. I'm not a man of great passions, or perhaps I'm afraid of the ferocity of my passions and lock them down, carefully managing them so that they can't overwhelm me. In truth, I have a complicated relationship with passion. On one hand, I have a deep respect for it and admire people who exhibit a single-minded determination in pursuit of a goal. And on the other hand, I see that it can come at great cost and one I'm not sure I'm willing to pay. For example, my wife Debbie and I recently watched Jiro Dreams of Sushi, a fantastic documentary about a sushi chef in Tokyo whose passion for and unflinching dedication to his craft are truly astonishing. And I had 2 very distinct and antithetical reactions simultaneously. On the one hand, I was totally in awe of this man who for nearly 70 years focused myopically on sushi, leaving the house at 5 in the morning and returning at 10 in the evening, working relentlessly to improve his skills. At the same time, I thought of all the things he missed as a result. He notes, for example, that his sons thought him a stranger when they were younger because he was never home, and the punishing hours in the restaurant could not have allowed for much of a life outside of work. I'm not sure I have ever personally been willing to commit myself to a single thing so completely. At the end of the day, I want to be a decent person and live a good life. I want to think that the people whose lives I have touched, even if there are not many of them, are a little better for it. And I hope to leave the world no worse and hopefully at least infinitesimally better than I found it. And that kind of sums it up. So that's it, nice and simple, right? Well, if you know me, you know we're not done yet, not by a long shot, because it's not that simple. If you don't have a passion, a thing you give your heart to, then how do you govern, organize, and drive your actions? For me, it has been through a mix of beliefs and principles, core values that guide my actions. And spoiler alert, it's possible that I might have discovered a passion or 2 along the way. I was raised in a mixed religion household, that is, by a father and mother who were Catholic and Presbyterian respectively. My parents taught me to treat everyone, including myself, with dignity and respect. And while, like any human, they did not live perfectly by this tenet, they demonstrated it repeatedly through actions and words. I'm also a child of the 80s, which is to say I'm a product of a myriad of emotional highs and lows. The fall of the Berlin Wall, sappy John Hughes films, MTV Madonna and one-hit wonders, the Olympic hockey dream team and Princess Di, Top Gun and Gordon Gekko, and Monty Python. The list could go on and on. My generation saw the end of the Cold War, the laying down of arms by the IRA, and peace declared in the Middle East. Many of us came out of college into a booming economy and the rise of the seemingly limitless possibilities of personal computers and the World Wide Web. The terrifying new disease AIDS arose. Greedy corporations ran roughshod over the well-being of employees, the environment, and the larger community, all in the name of profit. And the great democratic experiment of Russia failed and was replaced by a cruel oligarchy. Passion, I learned, is a powerful and unpredictable thing which can take us to the heights of Everest or just as easily lead us to an icy grave. But I was also taught about the power of belief and the importance of core principles that give us a center around which to build our identities. My parents, of course, were instrumental in this. My mother, for example, treated all of her LGBTQ friends with the same respect as anyone else, even though the rest of the world did not. Coming from a long line of incredibly accomplished women, my mother also modeled for us the ability to be empowered both in the work world and in the role of a nurturer. My father, a working class child from the slums of Hartford, worked his way through Yale, Harvard, and MIT to become a world-renowned scientist. Perhaps because of his roots, he was one of the most unassuming and non-judgmental people I've ever met, and he seemed always to believe people had value that could not be measured based on their socioeconomic status, their gender, or the color of their skin. But our parents don't get the final word on who we become, and there are many other influences that impact our growth. I certainly had my fair share of TV shows that I couldn't get enough of: Batman, Knight Rider, The A-Team, MacGyver, not to mention Hee Haw and The Muppets. And of course, it's the experiences themselves that shape us the most. Without going into the blow by blow, throughout middle school, high school, and college, I learned that I could reinvent myself, fashion myself into the person I aspired to be. It was not easy. It took a long time, and I was not always successful. But over time, I found that if I was mindful of my values and consistently tried to live by them, I could make strides towards my ideals. I do believe that there is some great mystery to life that we cannot understand or explain, that we should find beauty in what is around us, but throw in a little skepticism to keep it all in check. And most of all, that we should not take ourselves too seriously, because after all, let's acknowledge that in the grand scheme of things, very few of us are that important. I think that's one of the reasons I love going to the mountains so much. With my feet planted firmly on bedrock and my gaze resting on ancient peaks, I feel the weight of millennia surround me, reminding me of the insignificance of our worldly concerns in the face of the cosmos. So after all that, here are my principles, or at least the current iteration of them. I strive above all for integrity, the idea that we should behave as we believe, and that the face we present to the world should resemble the one we wear on the inside. This is actually quite difficult to do, and I often fail miserably, either through laziness or lack of ability, but this does not mean I should stop trying. Of course, this means I also must believe in forgiveness, both for ourselves and for myself. Particularly for myself, for if we can forgive ourselves for our failures without excusing them, it's that much easier to dust ourselves off and try again. I believe that there is divinity in the everyday, that every mundane moment, every insignificant particle contains infinite beauty and wonder, if we only stop to notice it. And I am anchored by gratitude, being reminded of how much I have to be thankful for, of how unbelievably fortunate I am, helps me manage when things get challenging. I said at the beginning that I have never been comfortable unleashing my passions or following any one thing with a single-minded purpose. And while there may be paths I've never trod as a result, there are so many other paths I have followed instead, and for which I am profoundly grateful. In high school, for example, I sat down at a table of interesting-looking students with whom I struck up a friendship. As it turns out, they were all on the track team, and many, many years later, running 6 days a week has become a meditation and a core foundation of my spiritual and mental health. In fact, as I've probably shared with many of you, I see in running an apt metaphor for how we handle the challenges of life. Similarly, although I was an English and psychology major who only took one computer science course in college, I worked every summer and holiday at a job where I was handed a book on programming and was fortunate enough to discover the joy of technology, the discipline of constant learning and intellectual challenge that enriches virtually every day of my life. Shortly after I joined the UUCC, I was gently coaxed by Kathleen Carpenter, in that inimitable way she has, into doing something I would never have considered voluntarily: teaching. I have been astounded at the deep fulfillment I have found in teaching and mentoring youth through our whole lives, coming of age, RE classes for ages ranging from pre-K through high school. Probably the one place in my life where I was smart enough to proactively chase a passion was when I met and fell in love with one of the most amazing people I've ever encountered. But I never anticipated the incredible privilege and reward it would be to raise two extraordinary young women with her. But by and large, these things happened because I opened myself to a myriad of opportunities and tried things out to see if I would like them. So I guess in the end, my realization is that sometimes passion is something we discover along the way, and maybe it does not always burn bright and fierce, but instead smolders hotly in the forge of our souls. So I'm going to check the chat. Susan says she did not come from a family of storytellers, nor has her daughter. And now with her parents both gone, she's aware of how much she doesn't know about their lives. How do I develop these skills to pass stories and history to my daughters? That's a great question. I'm not sure I'm enough of an expert to give you the best answer, but I know for me, it has just been a way I relate to the world. I look at everything I see is a story. You know, there's always a narrative. What is the backstory? So for example, if I see, you know, Debbie and I will do this, right? You see somebody, you're out for dinner or lunch or something, and you see people and you try to think of what their story is. How did they get there? Why are they there? What happened in their day today? And you start to realize that everything in the world is this interconnected web of stories that we all have. Even if we're not good at telling them, they are there. And I guess, again, not being an expert in this, probably Jay or Eve could give you a lot of pointers on it. But to me, it is probably just to get out there and start telling stories, even if you feel like you're doing it badly. The more you, as I always tell my daughters, the more you do something, the better you get at it, right? So, sorry, I don't have a better answer than that. Now I can fill space with just lots of random talking, so I'm hoping that if people have questions, they feel free to chime in and direct the conversation a little bit. One of the things I was taught many years ago, which I'm at right now, is if you really want people to ask you questions, quiet for a long time. Let's see, we got a couple in. Moderation in all things. Actually, one of my favorite quotes, Carol, on that is Mae West, I think it was, who said, I believe in moderation in everything, especially moderation. So yes, I do a lot with moderation, but I also, you know, there are times when I think you have to let it go a little bit and embrace the moment. In fact, I mean, being in the moment in a lot of ways is that idea of appreciating beauty. The only way you really do that you see what's amazing and beautiful in the world, is if you stop in any given moment and let go of all the controls and just be there, observe it, and see it. I would, for example, a lot of times when we're with service, we'll sit out on the front porch, and having all the birds and the sounds of the life around us coming in somehow adds to the experience of service. Let's see. Jay's comment is, you seem to equate giving one's heart with passion. Is that necessary? Might it be possible to understand giving one's heart with something that is a bit more ordinary? That's a great point, Jay. And I suppose in a way that's the thread that I am somewhat following. It's again the divinity in the mundane, the extraordinary in the everyday, right? That I think I always hear, so to your point, this is why I struggle so much every year or every other year with COA, we do the Credo, and I struggle with what is it that I give my heart to, and I feel like it needs to be something grandiose. And I think you very nicely put your finger, Jay, on it, which is maybe it isn't always something grandiose. Maybe it is just to go through life and in the moments, you know, do the best you can with them and to touch the lives of people around you. Let's see. Debbie comes, Barbara Divini said, Debbie comes from a Jewish background. How has this diversity of religious background enriched your lives? So that's another great question. And I don't know if some of you probably heard the joke we tell, which is, you know, I grew up I was raised Catholic in New York, so I know my bit of Yiddish and I know the Jewish high holy days. Debbie was raised Jewish in New Orleans, which is about 80% Catholic. She actually knows all of the saints' days and everything better than I do. So in a lot of ways, we joke that we've come from a similar background. But there are differences, and it's interesting for me, and I think because of my parents' experience. My father was devoutly Catholic. We went to church every Saturday without. I think my father, until he got ill towards the end of his life, could count on one hand the number of times he missed church or a holy day of obligation. I mean, he was devout and a scientist, by the way. So really, a very interesting dichotomy. My mother, so part of the deal was we had to be raised Catholic, for them to get married. But she was always supportive of his religion, but neither was he denigrative of hers. And so I think when Debbie and I got together, and what was interesting is my father never, ever questioned our union or our partnership, right? He loved Debbie. He thought she was amazing. He supported her 100%, and he supported our marriage. And so I think we were able then to learn from each other. I've learned so much more than I knew about Judaism and the experiences. And I've often told people, coming from where I come from as, white, Christian, essentially, although down here I learned that Catholic's not Christian, but white Christian male, right? One of the interesting experiences we had is when we first came here, we went to the temple first to see how that would work for us. And I told Debbie, I said, this is really interesting for me. It's one of the few places I've been where I am genuinely in the minority. And it's a good experience to have. It's important to have that experience. And I think Debbie has brought that to her. Part of, I don't want to speak too much for my wife, but part of her Jewish experience, of her identity, has been being reminded of what it is to be an outsider, and to not always be in the power group. And I think that's a humbling and important thing to be reminded of on a regular basis. That is one of the things that has certainly enriched my life. I mean, I cannot count the ways that I've been enriched by meeting and partnering with Debbie. So we'll save that one for another time, probably. Shannon wanted to know if do I feel it's necessary to schedule these moments when I stop to appreciate beauty, or is it spontaneous? Both, I think. For me personally, I'm sure we're all different. There are times when I will suddenly realize I have not done enough of stopping to appreciate the moment, and I will look for an opportunity. Although the truth is, so when we were commuting into work, almost every morning I would park at the far end of the parking lot, and as I was walking to my office, I would just almost spontaneously take this deep breath and feel the air around me and look at the sky and just appreciate that this is another day, right? And that's, those moments, I think they only happen spontaneously if we're able to let go of the noise in our head, which is often hard to do. And I know I certainly can get very caught up in I got to do this, I got to do that, I got these 20 things on my schedule today, I've got emails to answer, and da da da. Being able to take that breath in any given moment, that's, as soon as you do that, to me, that's when it happens. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but like I said, there are also times like we have some friends who have a house up in the mountains, and you can bet that anytime they say, hey, are you free on a weekend to come up, I will figure out a way to make it happen. So there is a little scheduling too. Kate wants to know how having kids and working with kids changed my passions in life. So this is what interesting. In college, what I didn't touch on is that in college, so I went into college saying, well, I guess I'll be an English major because I did love writing, by the way. It's actually another thing I didn't touch on, ironically. I've loved writing. I used to write a lot in high school. But again, it was one of those places where I said, I'm not willing to starve for my art to all intents and purposes, right? And so I said, I like writing, maybe I'll be an English major, but I don't really see that as a career. My freshman year of college, I took a psychology intro psych, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And so then the next course I took second semester was a developmental psychology course, and it blew my mind away. It just blew my mind. I was so floored by how humans become humans. We start with this incredible mix of programming and then response to our environment. It's really astonishing. And I was kind of hooked. So I actually added psychology. I was a double English and psychology double major because I wanted to take as many developmental psych courses as I could. And so when we had kids, it was, I often talk about how the first one was this incredible sea change. I mean, my whole universe changed, right? Seismically. I went from being one person to being a parent with this tiny creature who was completely dependent on me, and in both amazing and challenging ways. I always tell people the cliche of it's the most challenging and most rewarding thing I've ever done is totally true here. And so it was this seismic shift. All of a sudden, I used to be very blasé about work and whether I had a job. I mean, I wanted to do things I enjoyed, and I enjoyed what I did for work, but I wasn't worried about, well, I have a job next month or not, right? It didn't stress me out. Man, the second I had kids, that changed dramatically. I was worried about having a second child. I wasn't sure I could handle that level of change again. Turned out that it was a much more incremental change. So changing from not being a sort of a primary or a joint caregiver to being just somebody with an additional, giving additional care to one more person is certainly still a big deal, but not the level of change for me that the first child was. And so I think, did it refocus? Sorry, again, I tell stories, right? I don't give you short answers. Did it change my passions? I guess, I'm not sure it changed my passions, but it probably changed the way I channeled them and dealt with them, because I think that is probably where I started to introduce a bit more structure in my life and a bit more discipline even, because all of a sudden it did matter a lot more whether I kind of had things under control, right? Before it was okay to careen a bit from one thing to the next. And there were certain basic responsibilities I had, but in the grand scheme of things, I felt very free, right, in terms of where is my path leading. So I felt more that I had to ensure that there was sort of a minimum threshold. So I think that maybe changed, but I don't think the specific things that I enjoy in life. I love music. I love food. As I've said, and by the way, I didn't find the mentoring of youth thing as a kind of a calling, if you will, until much later, until when Rachel and Samantha were in RE. And I remember Kathleen reached out. I think this was actually when Samantha was in RE, and she was in the pre-Ks. I think it was Rachel. And they were looking for teachers, and Kathleen talked me into doing part-time to start, right? So I only had to do a few weeks a year kind of a thing. And each year somehow it grew. And then when I wanted my kids to go through ALPS, I recognized how important that program, by the way, is an amazing program. I cannot say enough about it. I taught because I wanted to make sure my kids were in it. And once I did that, I was hooked. That just totally changed my world from that perspective. Again, sorry, long answer to probably a short question. This is a good one. How do you know what is divine versus what is mundane? I think I would say that that's kind of the point, that I don't think you do. I think that the mundane is divine if you stop and look at it the right way. That the things we take for granted every day, we go through our lives and we have to take stuff for granted. You can't tune into every detail all the time. It's very difficult. It would overwhelm us. And so all of these things we take for granted are really quite extraordinary. The act of breathing is really, if you think about it, an amazing thing. The way our bodies work. I'm looking right now out a window on the other side of the screen, and there are leaves on the trees. And that whole thing, to me, is really extraordinary. And so I think it is the mundane is divine. We just don't notice it most of the time. So I think we're getting close to time. I'm not sure. I don't see more questions, although I'm certainly happy, as again, always, to talk more.
Well, thank you so much, David, for being willing to do this for us here on Zoom today. And you've really made us think a lot about different aspects about passion and what that means. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you to everybody who joined us today. And we'll be doing another Credo on May 24th. And our speaker will be Kate Stroud. So we'll look forward to that. Okay, everybody, bye.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'll say one more thing. Thank you so much under all the conditions. And I wanted to say to people who came in late, there are a few people who came in late, this has been recorded and you'll be able to see it on Currents. And I want to take it in again anyway. So thank you so much.
Thanks, folks.
Take care.